I grew up in an era when television, especially kids' TV, was pretty black and white. I mean, we had color TV, but the plot lines were black and white. You know, simple, predictable. Batman, the Rifleman, Speed Racer, Underdog. It really didn't matter which show you watched because it was really only one story. It usually went like this. There's a bad guy and he's out to harm the world for personal gain. Maybe it's money or power, or I don't know, maybe he just hated people. But in the end, there's a bad guy and he's going to do whatever he has to do, whatever he wants to do to get what he wants. Now on the other side of the equation, there's a good guy, Batman, Rifleman, etc., who feels a moral obligation, almost a calling to stand up to the bad guy and put things right. The good guy always gets in some sort of predicament and is usually facing a life and death circumstance, but in the end, he pulls through and he wins the day. So when Jesus began to tell the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector, people could have thought that they were in for a good guy versus bad guy kind of story. I mean, Pharisees were the most fastidiously religious people alive in Jesus' day. If religion can make you good, and the Jews believed it could, the Pharisees were as good as it gets. Tax collectors, on the other hand, were the most hated people in all of Israel. Not only did they work for the enemy, they were traitors to their own countrymen. Now, if you haven't watched the lesson we taught on Jesus calling Levi to be a disciple, please go do that. And if you can't remember what was said in that lesson, please go back and watch it again. I don't have time to rehearse the whole lesson here, but I need to give you a taste of what we talked about so that this parable will make more sense. So here we go. The Pharisees of Jesus' day saw it as their holy obligation to practice religious righteousness, to balance out the sins of their unrighteous and wayward fellow Jews. They divided sin into 4 categories and therefore divided sinners into 4 categories. The Pharisees, they were in category 1. They considered themselves righteous because they obeyed the rules better than anyone else in Israel. Tax collectors, on the other hand, were in category 4 because they handled money which had a picture of Caesar on it, which is a graven image, and that's a violation of the second of the 10 Commandments. And that same money had an inscription that proclaimed Caesar to be divine, the very Son of God, a claim that was in violation of the first of the 10 Commandments. Now, according to the Pharisees, tax collectors had denied God, and the only way they could be forgiven was to confess their sin and be put to death. So in Jesus' day, this wasn't just a good guy and a bad guy. This was the best guy and the worst guy. The parable moves quickly. They both approached the temple to pray, no doubt as part of the ever-present crowd that frequented the temple daily. They both separate themselves from the crowd, but in different ways. Our text says the Pharisee was standing by himself as he prayed, "God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector." He goes on to tout his many righteous works. But the part that really sticks out to me is that he doesn't credit God for any ability to do any of those righteous works that he's so proud of. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. Not you give grace to walk in strength over temptation. No, I did it. The tax collector was also separated, not to an exalted place like the Pharisee. Our text says that he was standing far off. He wouldn't even lift his eyes. He beat his breast, a practice that Jews of the day were only allowed to perform one day a year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This tax collector had no doubt about his broken and fallen condition. He only had one hope, mercy. So that's what he cried out for, and that's what he got. Not a guarantee of righteous and perfect performance for the rest of his life, just mercy. And Jesus says that the tax collector went home justified. So it turns out that there's a plot twist in our story. Because the guy that we thought was the good guy turned out to be the bad guy. And the guy that we thought to be the bad guy turned out to be the bad guy. You see, in the gospel story, there's only one good guy. In Mark 10:18, Jesus asked the rich young ruler, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone." And since Jesus is God, well, he is the good guy in our story. He's the one who faced the life and death circumstance and prevailed. But don't get too discouraged yet. the story doesn't end there. In 2 Corinthians 5:21, Paul tells us that God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So in Christ, we become the good guy. But left to our own attempt, well, you get the picture. So let me leave you with this thought. If all the things that you think make you dirty, broken, unacceptable to God were eradicated from your existence by one single prayer, how would you feel? I mean instant freedom from sin and its persuasion in your life. From this moment forward, how would you feel? How long do you think it would take for your good behavior to push you to the place where you, like the Pharisee in our story, forget the gift of God that enabled you to even want holiness or purity in your life? How long would it be before the greater sin of pride slipped into your life, where the sins of fault and fallen nature used to exist? Isn't it our awareness of our own weakness that keeps us desperately connected to the God who overcomes our sin? What if we quieted our self-righteous monologue just long enough to reach out a hand of hope instead of a word of contempt? Or if we're standing far off, what if we lift our eyes just high enough to realize that we're standing in the presence of God at His holy temple, where forgiveness is freely given to everyone who asks?